Welcome to Night Shadows. I'm Stuart Best, where the paranormal is normal, where that which you thought you knew, you didn't, and where the future can be known if you know exactly where to look.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in and listening to Night Shadows. We got a really special guest on with us tonight. Richard Shaw, who's done a lot of research into Bible codes and producing the Watcher series, et cetera, and we have Larry with us as well. Hi, Richard. How's it going?
Hi, it's great to be on with you guys again tonight. I hope you are
okay. And Larry,
great.
How are you doing on your mountaintop?
Oh, I'm doing okay. No rain today, and I'm really ready to listen to some of Richard's data.
Yeah, Richard, where do you want to start? You can open it up wherever your heart leads. What do you want our folks to know about?
Okay, well, that's kind of you. So the first thing that happened recently, as you know, I'm out here in the LA area and close by to Hollywood, and occasionally my job takes me into Hollywood. And so I was working on a project a couple weeks ago for Bill Goldstein, who's a pretty famous music composer, and Bill they're doing a documentary about his life because he's done so much. He started out in Motown and wrote a lot of the music for the television show Fame back in the 80s, which I know my kids, when they were growing up, used to watch. And he would get orders to write the music for those shows. I mean, he'd have to crank out the music so fast, I don't even know how he did it, except that what this did was sharpen his abilities to write music super fast. Mm-hmm. And he ended up having this really unusual ability you could take like 3 notes and he could compose a complete composition on it instantly, just off the top of his head. So he started doing that for people, and he's been called all over the world, to various countries, to do concerts, and people will walk up on the platform and they'll have a big Bosendorfer standing up there, and they'll play 3 just totally random notes on the keyboard, and he will instantly make an entire composition that reflects this guy's personality and everything else, and it's astonishing. So I was working with the director of the project, who is Ted Kochev, and Ted was the guy that directed Rambo: First Blood back in the 80s. Remember that movie?
Oh, yes, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, he directed that film, and amongst a bunch of other films, he directed a ton of Law and Order episodes and several other hit films. And so I was working on him with that, and then his friend came along with him, Tom Noble, and Tom Noble is a really great editor, won an Oscar, an Academy Award for the editing he did on the movie Witness with Harrison Ford. Mm-hmm. And so it's really interesting. He also edited the movie Red with Bruce Willis, and a ton of other blockbuster films. And these guys were like sitting right behind my head watching me edit. Which is no pressure or anything, but it was kind of a high pressure situation. We were blocked down the street from Warner Brothers, across the street from the Smokehouse, which is a famous restaurant there, right on, Barham Road. It goes right through all of the studio areas. So, in the process of that, I had been asked to come up with 3 or even 4 hours, but I couldn't come up with that much, but 3 hours of never before seen behind the scenes footage of the Torah Codes stuff that we had shot. And I started putting that together, and all of that's going to be up on Amazon Prime Video, which is, if you have Amazon Prime, it'll be essentially free. You can pull it up, you can watch the Torah Code movie, and once the 3 hours of additional footage is up, you'll be able to watch that. And the way we get compensated from all of this effort and time and expense is we're credited by the number of minutes people actually watch.
So can you give us kind of a rundown on what they would be watching? And what's
sure.
your latest research on the Torah Codes?
Well, what's been interesting is most of the codes that I've been getting from Rabbi Glazerson have been Israel-related or terrorism-related. And so a lot of them, most people aren't all that interested in what's going on in Israel, and I realize that. It's kind of sad, but there are incredible things happening in Israel right now with the Temple Mount and with the Arabs rioting on the Temple Mount and causing problems. And so Bibi Netanyahu was, and also the Jerusalem police had put up metal detectors to screen people coming up onto the Temple Mount and going to the Western Wall and all of that. And that created an enormous ruckus, and so they had to take that all down, which is kind of sad because it would have screened out the Islamics that come in there with, knives and weapons and things like that and kill people. And that's something that we know happens. So there's tense times going on right now in Israel. And then I'm just asking for everybody to kind of pray for Rabbi Glazerson because Tuesday of this week he lost his wife of 51 years, passed away. So, of course, it's Shabbat tonight in Israel, so I'm not going to be hearing back from him. I doubt if I'll hear from Glazerson until Monday, but I will call him at that point. And, of course, I've already sent my condolences. I heard from his son in New York who told me about it. So, just keep him in prayer. He's a great guy and a very close friend of mine. And, that's hard to be married that long and suddenly lose your spouse.
Yeah.
Oh. So, have you got any Bible codes we could say that you can release at this point that deal with Israel? I know a lot of people, like you said, just don't seem to be too interested in Israel, even though Israel is a time clock for the entire planet. And what's going on in Israel ties directly to what's coming up, I believe, on 9/21, 9/22 in September. It all seems to be relating together.
What I think what I'd like to discuss, since I've spent so much time lately going through this footage, it's given me kind of a perspective that I haven't had in a long time on the Torah Codes. And that, what I mean by that is I didn't realize that the very first interview that we did with Professor Rips went clear back to February of 2006. That's how long we've been at this. And I'd like to kind of unfold this because it gives you an idea of really what the Torah Codes are about, how they happened, why I'm still interested after all of these years, who these men are that are doing it, and what they had to put up with in order to convince people that this isn't just bogus. Mm-hmm. And the first interview I got was really funny because I've explained this story before, where my friend Lee gets on a plane and he ends up sitting with Professor Haralick by complete accident, or it seemed to be ordained that's what happened. He didn't know he was going to be sitting next to this man, and Professor Haralick was tied in with all the world experts in writing software to search the Torah. And it was because of that first meeting that we were able to get an audience with Professor Rips in Israel. Now, I wasn't able to go there and do it, but Lee suddenly got this job to go film this pastor in Israel reading scripture at various holy places. It was kind of a dorky assignment. It wasn't creative. The guy wasn't a very good reader. But, you know, what it did, it got Lee all expenses paid, trip to Israel, and he brought his good camera. And I said, look, if you're going to be there, can you record Professor Rips for me? And so working through Professor Haralick out of New York, we got permission for him to go see Professor Rips at his apartment in Jerusalem. So Lee comes back, and I see him a couple of weeks later after his trip, and he brings me these tapes, and I couldn't bear to look at them yet because I wanted to do this project so badly, and I knew, like, well, this is just going to drive me insane if I watch it. I finally broke down and watched it, and he had interviews with Professor Rips and with the former NSA codebreaker Harold Gans. We didn't have anything with Glazerson at the time, but what we did get with Rips was probably almost an hour of super exclusive footage where Rips, who is probably mostly considered the father of the Torah Codes on computer because of his tenacity on sticking with it and pulling talented people in to work with him. And probably one of the best things he ever did was getting another guy who was a code writer, and his name was Doron Whitstrom, brilliant computer specialist. And there was also another man named Yoav Rosenberg, but, you know, that guy's kind of disappeared off the face of the earth. There's no pictures of him on the internet. There's not much said about him when it comes to all this, but it was really Rips, Rosenberg, and Whitstrom that figured out how to search the Torah. And it goes way back to 1976, and really they started in 1978 actually doing it. And it was all based on Rabbi Weissmandel, who passed away in 1958, his idea that there was equidistant letter sequencing going on in the Torah, and he had been counting with his finger, and he was teaching out of New York at the time, finally passed away in 1958. And in his honor, they published a book on equidistant letter sequencing that he had discovered. And 55 years ago, Rabbi Glazerson found a copy of that book in London and bought it. I mean, it's just when you hear some of this stuff, you go, "You've got to be." When he told me that the other day, I said, "You've got to be joking." I said, "You have a first edition of Weissmandel's book?" And he said, "Yes."
That's the Lord.
You don't know how rare something like that is. I can't even begin to tell you. I mean, Weissmandel was a mathematical whiz kid, genius type guy, Jewish man. But when he was like in his late teens, early 20s, he was writing down the Torah on 3x5 index cards in 10x10 spaces looking for patterns.
Wow.
That's what he does to pass the time. And that's what, like a code breaker would do. You know, that's what they would do. They'd be looking for patterns in the text to see if it forms stuff. And he finally stumbled across and I've told you guys this before, he found the word Torah in Genesis and Exodus. In Leviticus, he found the name Yahweh. And at first I thought it was Hashem, but actually it was Yahweh. And every every 8 letters, and then in the books of Numbers and Deuteronomy, he found the word Torah again every 50 letters, but in Deuteronomy it was every 49 letters because that was the book Moses wrote. So he felt like, well, Moses doesn't get the perfect number 50, he gets 49. And sure enough, there was the word Torah. I mean, that stuff is so astonishing to me, you know. And no computer at the time to do it, all counting with his finger, and all of that stuff came up repeatedly. So that was like a huge clue that he was on to something. So they started looking for other things. Well, there was another rabbi named Rabbi Yaniv who had stumbled across Weiss-Mendel's book, and there was also another man, I believe his name was Oren, who had done a little computer program and stuck some of the Torah into the computer and started trying to do this and came up with some rudimentary results and showed Professor Rips. Now, what I think is so fascinating with this is, I mean, you guys are old enough to remember computers in the late 70s, early 80s.
Oh, yeah.
You know, they were really super primitive. I mean, in those days, and people listening that don't know what we're talking about, computers were basically little boxes that had an RF port on the back, which means they basically had an adapter so that it could plug into the antenna port on your television. I mean, really, I know how stupid this sounds, okay? So then you had this little coax cable that would come out of your computer and go into your NTSC television, and you'd end up with this screen with green letters over a black background, and it was all in NTSC, so everything had scan lines in it, and it was kind of low res, but the fact that you were actually getting a computer to actually do something was astonishing.
Yes.
And the first ones that I saw were the Apple IIs when they came out. Now, this was like, the ones that I first remember seeing were like in 1985. And I know they came out way before that. I think the Apple IIs came out in the late 70s. But I wasn't into computers like that then because they just didn't intrigue me. I thought, what am I going to do with this? It's just going to give me numbers on a screen, you know, unless I have a real reason to do that. So what got me interested in computers was music. And they had computers then that they were hooking up a MIDI interface to them. Now, this was in, I would guess, 1983, 1984. And they were able to record 4 tracks of digital MIDI information onto a computer and play it back. Now all of a sudden I'm going, well, okay, now I can see a use for this. I could write television scores if I had a computer. But the idea of looking at all my music as a list of numbers just didn't appeal to me. And it wasn't until the Macintosh came out in 1985, I didn't really start using one until 86, I guess it was. All of the music then came up like music. There were notes and stabs and like score paper, even on a simple lowly Macintosh Plus with only 1 megabyte of RAM. You could actually do that, and to me it was like it was the future. I mean, it seemed like, wow, I can play this on my keyboard and the notes pop up on the screen like a half second after I play them. You know, I just was just dumbfounded that it could do that. So I went out and bought a Mac and spent a ton of money getting all set up to do it. And I think back in those days, I think it cost me $2,500 to get a system together. And I, you know, when my mother passed away and left me her house in California, and I used some of the money from that to buy my first Mac. And that's how I got set up with it and learned how to do it. So I understand what these guys were going through, how primitive it was. And one thing that the early computers didn't have were fonts. All of the fonts were basically the same. They were really simple, and it was on an NTSC screen. So they were just real simple-looking characters, if you remember in those days.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no way to display a Hebrew font. There just wasn't any such thing. So what they did was they, the different letters, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, all these Hebrew characters, they would give them numbers, assign them each a number, and then they put the Torah in, and only part of the Torah, because there wasn't enough memory to put the whole Torah in the computer. They put it in as numbers, and then they would ask the question numerically, and then the computer would figure out the answer and send it out as a string of numbers.
Oh.
When I heard that they had done this, I'm saying, "Oh, that is so complicated." And Rip just looked at me like I'm an idiot. Like, no, this is very simple, actually. And I'm going, "All right, if you say so." To me, I can't see how you'd ever figure it out because everything's encoded. Everything, the answer's encoded, let alone the question. But they discovered stuff that way. And as the computers got better in the mid to late 80s, they were able to get on computers at various universities and actually put Hebrew fonts in there. And so I asked Professor Rips, when I was really just getting to know him, and this was back in 2009, when I spent an afternoon alone with Professor Rips at Professor Herlich's house in New York. Everybody left, and here I am with Professor Rips by myself. I was as nervous as a cat. I had no idea, what am I going to say to a world-class mathematician? Why would anything I say have any interest at all, right? So I started just asking him various things, like what happened when you decided to set yourself on fire in Riga Square, and then what happened, and what do you think of Isaiah 13 or Isaiah 24, where it talks about the world being turned upside down, and before I know, I don't know how many hours had passed. We were just so into it, and I discovered how brilliant this guy is, and how humble of a person he is. And the time we spent together was so enjoyable. I'll never forget it. It was just like it was like being in the presence of an Old Testament Bible character all afternoon, like the real deal. I mean, like sitting with Daniel or Elijah or someone like that. That's what it felt like.
Wow.
Completely pure in heart, focused on just what's God doing with these codes, and I was so very impressed with him, and so that kind of started something, and after that happened, it was like, okay, these guys are the real deal. They're not here to trick anybody. They're not here to make falsehoods or anything like that. So these original 3 hours, Rips is explaining what happened when they released their results. And the first time they did it publicly was in 1994 in a magazine. It's like a white paper called Statistical Science. And they actually published it. And Statistical Science, I think, was embarrassed that they published it because it seemed like some kind of fantasy. And Rips had this line that he said in his initial interview that Lee shot for me in 2006. He said, people thought that the idea of the Torah Codes was so fantastic and so unbelievable that they tried to figure out how to disprove the technique they used. And they accused those guys of fraud.
Yeah.
And in 1999, statistical science came out with a rebuttal of the Torah Codes using War and Peace as the input search mechanism, the source footage for searching something, and said they could find codes in War and Peace. And so basically what killed Rips the most was they could say this line, codes can be found in any text. And I said, what is it that hurt you the most about this? And he said it was that in one simple sentence they could refute the entire Torah Code phenomena without understanding what was really going on. And so that's why in the
one is of the Lord, the other is of man. How do you even compare the two?
Well, that's, when you're dealing with the scientific community, they don't want anything that has anything to do with religion. And we're not even looking at the Torah Codes as a religion or a cult or anything. We're just saying, okay, the Torah is a mysterious book. It was given to us under very mysterious circumstances. Some would even say it was given to us by aliens. I mean, I know Michael Drossin tends to believe that's probably the case. And then there's clues, both in the books of Enoch and also in the book of Acts in the New Testament, that seems to indicate that Torah was given to Moses by angels. And so then you have to ask yourself, well, this is why, guys, I can't stomach the idea that there's codes throughout the entire Bible. It makes no sense to me, because it'd be like searching in War and Peace and finding words. It's just not the same. And Rip's in the first 3 hour, actually he's in part 2 of the behind-the-scenes pieces. When that comes up, they should be online on Amazon next week. And you can actually, if you want to sit down and watch them all, there's going to be some times you're going to be wading through some really deep scientific information. I left it all in. I didn't care at this point. I thought people that really want to understand this are going to wade through it. They're going to listen to all, the thick accents and all of that. But it's going to be closed captions, so you could always pop that up on your screen if you have trouble understanding. Because I didn't have time to type word for word everything they said and super that. In some places I did, but I didn't. There just wasn't time. They wanted to get this up so quickly that all I could do was edit it together and deliver it. And it was an incredible amount of work just to do this much. But Rips explained this whole process of all of the adversity that they encountered as a result of it. But then he also printed, something like 25 pages of the Book of Numbers in Hebrew on tractor feed paper. And he unrolls it like a scroll on the long table that he has in his apartment. I've seen this table. So it's big, long kind of dinner table kind of thing. And he unrolled this whole scroll, and he says, many, many pages are completely empty. Now, this was like a few years after the 2001, the 9/11 disaster. He was looking for codes for airplane terror attack. That's one of his most famous tables that probably everybody has seen by this time. But he unrolls this whole scroll, and there'll be like one word in the corner and maybe another one way down on the floor on a page. But then all of the related words for 9/11 were all clustered together in chapter 20. You're not going to find that kind of clustering in War and Peace.
Yes.
Or any other random monkey text. But the Torah, that's intentional encryption to do something like that. All of the codes ended up in a tiny little segment, and if you counted all of the characters within, if you drew a box around that chapter where all of the codes are, there's only 234 characters in that area. And when you look at the same table, like in a random monkey text, a Hebrew text, we did it. Professor Herlick did it for me, and one of the tables it had 7,700 and some characters. The other one had 4,300 something characters.
Wow.
And yes, all of the words were there: airplane, terrorist attack. All of those were in there, but they had enormous skips, and they were separated by thousands of letters, and it was just random. Obviously random. It means nothing that you can find them. So it's a lie to say codes can be found in any text if you're trying to convince someone that the Torah codes are fake.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So that's one of the things that we go through. And then Professor Rips goes on to tell us why he tried to commit suicide. And this was early on in his life when he was like 20 years old, and he was in Riga, and the Soviets had come in and were taking over Czechoslovakia. And another kid who was at the university there by the name of Jan Palach went to Riga Square and set himself on fire and passed away 3 days later, protesting the invasion. Rips was so upset over the invasion that he decided to do what Jan Palach had done. So he wrapped himself with gasoline-soaked paper. He wrote a card with his protest on it and wrapped it in paper so nobody could see it, walks to Freedom Square, stands under the monument, and then he unfolds his card that says, "I protest the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia," and struck a match. And basically he went up in flames, and fortunately onlookers who were just walking by saw it and ran over to him and put him out. And he was immediately arrested by a plainclothesman KGB agent and taken to a Soviet prison, where he was incarcerated for 2 years for being opposition against the state.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds kind of like what's happening in America, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
So nobody knows how he got out, because he could have been there for more time. It could have been there for 10 years, for all we know. The sentence that he got, I don't know if he was given like a specific number of years he was going to stay in prison. But there was another guy named Vladimir Buchevsky who brought into light the poor treatment of prisoners in Soviet prisons. And a number of people were released because of Buchevsky's complaint. And one of the people that was released was Professor Rips. And instead they threw Vladimir into prison. So the guy that complained about it got thrown in prison for complaining and ended up being in prison for 10 years. But it got Rips out.
Wow.
And very few people know that part of the story. It's really incredible. This guy was brave enough to do something like that. So Rips was carted away to Jerusalem, and he was brought up an atheist. He never knew anything about Jewish religion or anything like that, even though he himself was a Jew. He had no idea what all this was about. In fact, he told me, he said he thought it was really strange. Everybody was dressed, in crazy clothes, wearing hats, and, all the different things that the rabbis wear, which now I'm really used to. It was really weird at first for me, too, just getting used to all the things these guys have to do and their little prayer books and the way that, everything has to be kosher food. And if you're a super rabbi, it's glot kosher. I mean, so it's like, I cooked for Glazerson, so I have to be really careful. Everything has to be just so for him. And I love doing it. I feel like I've got, Elijah kind of walking through my house, comes over. It's just so cool. So he was really kind of impressed by that. So he started studying the Torah because that was kind of what everybody did there. And he just loved it. He said he discovered that, and I'd never heard anyone say this before other than Rips. He called it a book of miracles. And normally, in the Christian community, when you talk about miracles, you think of Yeshua. Oh, he raised this guy from the dead, or he cured the guy with a withered hand, or he walked on water, or he said, peace be still, and all of the wind and everything dies down, and, while he's sleeping in a boat while the disciples are worried they're going to sink. Those are the things we think of as being miracles. Or maybe even, I guess it was Peter when the angel came in and released him from prison. Those are the kind of things that we normally think of as miracles. But actually, the Torah is full of profound miracles. And they're actually miracles that have enormous biblical proportions. I mean, they're like, as cool as all the New Testament miracles are, in the Torah, we're talking about the Red Sea parting and all of Pharaoh's chariots swallowed by the waters, walls of water that came down on them. We're talking about the Ark of the Covenant, where if you even touched it, you were dead. Yeah. We're talking about the ephod, where you could ask it questions and the Urim and Thummim would light up and give you an answer.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
It's fascinating. We're talking about the pillars of cloud and pillars of fire. We're talking about manna falling from heaven. We're talking about the Israelites conquering the giants. We're talking about Jacob wrestling with an angel and Lot being rescued by two angels that destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, there's like so much stuff just in the book of Genesis that when I was a kid, it was like just fun. It was like, this is really interesting stuff. Now I look at it that Moses was on this mountain, comes back with his face glowing and all that, walking down the mountain with the Ten Commandments and with the Torah. So this book is different. It's like blessed. It's like got angelic, the finger of God on it, essentially. It's like the real thing. I mean, now all of the other books in the Bible, and not trying to downplay or demean the importance of any of the other books, because we have prophecy in the book of Daniel and Malachi and in Isaiah and these other books in the Tanakh, and then in the New Testament, all the stuff that Jesus told us about, Matthew 24, Luke 21, Revelation, the rapture of the church in Thessalonians, all of this stuff that happens. What most of my Jewish friends don't understand is that all of this is tied together in one enormous tapestry of events.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff that Yeshua is talking about, he's quoting the book of Daniel, or he's talking about something in the end times. Or I know when L.A. Marzulli and I are trying to understand and grasp some of these prophecies, Jesus is like almost talking in a multi-dimensional fashion at times. He'll say, yeah, all of these stones are going to be thrown down. And we're not there watching him motion to whatever it is he's looking at, but we think at that point he was discussing the temple that's going to be destroyed in 70 A.D. And then he goes, and then they ask him, well, what's going to happen at the end of the age? And then he tells them that. Well, there's going to be wars and rumors of wars and so on. So in one breath he's talking about the temple going to be destroyed just in a few years from then, and in the next breath he's talking about what's going to happen now. Apparently, in the age we're living in, it sure seems like it's in But, you know, we could say maybe it won't be, but it sure seems like all of the signs of the Earth beginning to, its final collapse seems to be in our lifetime now. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm the first one to say, well, I could be, but I mean, there's just so much weird stuff going on right now, guys, that it's like I can't imagine things continuing the way they are much longer when they're calling for the assassination of our president openly on the news and everything else, talking about this. I mean, it's like, I'm just amazed by it. It's like, what? But
times of trouble are here.
They are. And over 20,000 people have been murdered in Mexico in 1 year because of drugs and the drug lords. And the guys in charge of the state of California don't want to quell the immigration. They're not concerned that element could be led into the state of California. It's just like, it's like everything that where you could say they've thrown out common sense. They've thrown it to the wind.
Yes.
It's just really strange. It's like lawlessness abounds. It's basically exactly what it says in Scripture, and none of it makes sense. And I don't know how much longer any of us are going to be able to stay in the United States of America if this keeps up, because it's going to be such a foreign land to us in a very short period of time that we're not even going to feel like this is our country anymore. At least that's what I think is happening.
Well, you're right in the middle of it. Of course, California is kind of a, a test state for the New World Order, like Massachusetts, Maryland, and a few of those other places are all kind of, I think, they're testing how the people are going to react, and at the same time they test them, they're acclimating them to give up their freedoms for peace and security, basically. So they're going. I think they're going to.
Strange.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's very strange. I mean, I hear everybody just now they've coined the phrase. Well, it's Hollywood. You've heard people say that, right? Hollywood this, Hollywood that. And the people that are saying that know nothing about Hollywood. None of them have been here, worked here, know people here. They just kind of assume. And what it is, I mean, I look at Hollywood and some of the old buildings and the history of some of the fantastic films that were produced here. And to me, there's this enormous creative legacy that Hollywood holds of incredible talent and really brilliant people. And there's a lot of people like that out here. And not all of them are nuts or evil or anything like that. But what has happened is the studios have promoted certain political agendas, essentially. And that has really destroyed the integrity that Hollywood once was. But meantime, there's a lot of people out here trying to do good work, good films. And I've been to other states, and I've worked in film and in other places. It's just not the same. And people are building enormous studios. There's huge, enormous state-of-the-art studios being built in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Screen Gems moved their operation to Wilmington, North Carolina a few years ago. Frank Capra II was in charge of the place, and I knew Frank really well. He was a good friend of mine, and I've hung out with him in Wilmington, and he's taken me on tours of Screen Gems. And this was way back when, I'd go through the lobby, and Jamie Lee Curtis would be walking through, that kind of thing, because they were shooting a film there. And he loved filmmaking. And poor Frank died of lung cancer in 2007. Frank Capra Jr. was the son of the famous Frank Capra that made It's a Wonderful Life and all those tremendous films in the 30s and 40s. And So it was great hanging out with him. I've always looked forward to having dinner with Frank and talking about old times and what it was like in your house, setting a table for Humphrey Bogart and people like that. That was his life. That's just the way things were in those days. So I look at that as being when Hollywood was in the golden era, and they had all of these really brilliant intellectual people in charge of making movies, and of course there was some worldliness too. I'm not saying there wasn't, but the churches of the time, some churches didn't even condone going to movies in those days. I know even my parents were like, "Oh, if you don't want to go to a sinful theater," and I look back at that now and I'm going, what would have been wrong to go see It's a Wonderful Life or a Walt Disney movie or something like that, or And the answer is there'd be nothing wrong with doing that. So people got into really some strange, phobias about it. So I think we just now I think that what has happened is, and Chuck Missler just put out a YouTube video. Said that the darkness is encroaching upon the entire world, and I think he's right. I think there's like something, whoever has been holding this back, and the scriptures don't tell us who it is. I don't think it's Yeshua, because I think it would say Yeshua if it was. It might be Michael or Gabriel or someone like that that's watching over humanity is going to lift his hand, remove his hand of basically protection. And what do we see now is just kind of the degradation of humanity. It's just everybody's kind of like, I don't know, it just seems like anything goes, anything sexual is okay. And I've studied other time periods, and I think we've talked about this on your show before, like during the bubonic plague, the church had this whole thing they were calling free mind. Free your mind. It's okay, and they were carting naked women around in ox carts through town, and they were saying that any form of sexuality is okay, the taboo has been lifted, and it was right after that the bubonic plague came. Some believe it came from rats or it came from the Far East. But then there's other reports of men appearing in the cities wearing black and carrying scythes and going through oat fields with these sticks that made hissing noises. And after they went through the fields, everybody started dying. And
angels of death.
It's interesting. Well, yeah, I really think that that's the case. I really tend to believe that's the real reason for it, because we've heard about that before in the book of Ezekiel, where there were like a few angels were sent down to kill everybody. Remember that in chapter 9?
Oh, yeah.
Ezekiel. I call it the Ezekiel Death Squad, because it's so sci-fi. It's just like something out of a movie where these guys show up in town. One guy is dressed in white linen and he has like a writer's kit, they said. Basically, he's taking notes on who was sad about what was going on in Israel, and he put a mark on their forehead so that they wouldn't be killed. And the other guys had, it says in the scriptures, they were carrying powerful weapons. Now, it didn't say pistols or revolvers or swords. It says powerful weapons, which to me makes me think
weapons.
It was some sort of high-tech device that they couldn't describe.
Yeah, they just called them slaughter weapons in the King James.
Yeah. And other versions that I've read call them powerful weapons. And then they threw all of the bodies in the temple courtyard. And then there was still apparently God's presence residing in that area, and this light from that, this pillar of cloud kind of thing, wafted out over to inspect these bodies. It's weird stuff. It doesn't sound human. And I think that what we read sometimes in Scripture is it's really a description of, if we saw that today, we'd immediately go, oh, they're aliens. This is like from another planet, or there's something that they got technology we don't have, and they're using it here. I mean, we would look at that now, and we would probably instantly know what it is. But in those days, they had no idea how to even describe it. So when you get down to the Torah Codes, I think that we're talking about entities that were super powerful, that basically looked at time as some kind of nonlinear thing and could encode the Torah and then give it to Moses that way. And Moses wouldn't even know that it was encoded, because he wouldn't have any way to decode it or even know that it was in the first place. And the interesting thing about that is that the lock on the Torah to find out whether it's encoded or not couldn't be broken until a computer was invented. That means that it was kind of time-stamped to be revealed for us
at
now.
the end. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that creepy when you think about that? I mean,
well,
I
don't think
our names are encoded in the Torah.
Say again.
Our names are encoded. A lot of us, I've spent
I think so.
days talking with Glavison, and I said, have you ever found a name that you couldn't find? And he said, yeah, there's some names we can't find. And then the light bulb switched on. I said, do you think the Torah is the book of life?
Yes.
That the code, everyone who's in the book of life has already been encoded. And if you're not encoded, you're not in there. That's
interesting. Well, you have two books. You have the Book of Life, and then you have the Lamb's Book of Life. And
I lost you. What? You have the what? I couldn't hear you.
The Lamb's Book of Life. You'll find that in Revelation.
Right.
So you have evidently two books, and if you're written in the Book of Remembrance, which is in the Old Testament, and then you have those written in the Lamb's Book, but I agree with you. I think everybody ever born is written in the Torah Code. I don't think there's any question about it.
Yeah, it's fascinating because Professor Herlick, who's a brilliant computer specialist and an instructor for City University in New York, told me once that doing the Torah Codes is the most difficult thing he's ever done, because it's so hard to figure out, and there's just layers to it. And in these behind-the-scenes things, he said, I think we've just stumbled on the tip of the iceberg here. There's so much more we don't understand how to even extract. And that's what these guys think. And there's really only a handful of men who understand this to this level. And there's a lot of people doing bogus codes, Bible codes. And it's completely absurd. And I just want to say right now, for those people who are doing that, they're deluding themselves. Just because they can find words with enormous skips all through the Bible does not mean they're getting actual data, actual encoded information. I'm talking about, and I included this in part 2 of the behind-the-scenes Torah Code interviews, that I ended the whole movie with a table that I've already told you guys about. It's the Comey covers up table. But I break it down in the film because if you can find that in War and Peace in the same way, then my hat's off to you. Because basically it has a whole story in this table. It says, Comey covers up, and that phrase is all stacked vertically, and that's as a skip of 513 characters. One line to the left, vertically next to that, it says, for the male, with the exact same skip, 513. So now we have Comey covers up for the male, both with the same skip in parallel rows next to each other. And then a little further to the left of those are two more sentences, each with a skip of 513, and it says, for use by, and then the next sentence, their foundation, meaning the Clinton Foundation, with a skip of 513. So you've got Comey covers up for the male for use by their foundation. Then at the top of the page, with a skip of -2, now minus means it's backwards, is the word Hillary. The word Hillary is encoded with only 2 skips, which means you could find that without a computer if you knew where to look. 2 skips. Every other letter. Hillary is encoded horizontally above all of these other lines of text. This is what Rips found. And then now here's like a 3D code. The word servers appears, sharing letters of the sentence that says making use by their foundation. The word servers is splayed out over the top of those 2 sentences. And the skip of the word servers is 1,539 characters. And when you realize where that number comes from, it's 3 times the number 513. Now that's scary, guys. That's like super, super advanced encryption. That's a definite encoding. There's no way that can randomly something like that just appear. It's not possible.
Yeah, right.
Someone put it there.
Amazing. So we have no idea of really what this universe is or how many dimensions it has. And obviously the Lord is outside of time and space and created all of it, he says. So I guess one just has to accept that we know virtually nothing. And have they found out, I think I read somewhere where they had come to the conclusion that this is multidimensional. You remember the movie Contact, where they finally figured out
wormholes and all that stuff?
Yeah, where they had to take the code that was being given and they had to make it multidimensional in order to break the code.
Right, so they could build the device that was going to send them through the universe. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised that Torah is very much like that if we just knew how to do it. It's because a lot of the Jews and rabbis believe that the Ten Commandments was that way. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
In fact, in our behind-the-scenes stuff, Nir Studnitsky and I talk about that. And it's basically the Midrash, which is kind of like a third-party view of what was going on in those days, which kind of reminds me of the Egyptian Kolbrin Bible, once referred to as the Bronze Book of Britain, that was written by various dudes that were just watching what was going on. in Egypt during the time of the parting of the Red Sea and all that stuff, and they were describing it with their own vernacular. And a lot of people think that there's a couple chapters in the Colburn Bible that basically seem to describe Nibiru, and because they're talking about the destroyer and all of these plagues that happened to Egypt, and that it could have had an astronomical causality to create all of those things. When you look at things from a scientific standpoint like that, it becomes more viable. But yeah, I think that I once heard. You guys know who Danny and Brinkley is, right? He wrote a book back in the 90s called Saved by the Light.
Yes.
And his story was that he was on the phone during an electrical storm, and lightning hit the wiring going into his house, went through his head and out his feet, and threw him up in the air and onto the bed, and actually burned a place on the floor where he was standing. And he was like completely toasted from the inside out. And they rushed him to the hospital and thought he was dead. In fact, he probably was indeed dead for maybe going on at least a half an hour. And during that time, he was taken into heaven. Well, the same guy was saying he's died more than once, because that weakened his body to such an extent in his heart that he actually passed away one other time on an operating table several years later, and he had died, clinically died 3 times. So he's not even, he kind of jokes around about it now. He says, next time I die, please cremate me quickly, because he doesn't want to come back. Because it's so much more interesting on the other side. This is all kind of like an illusion, what we're living in now. It's really not our true selves. And he said that he was shown, only reason I mention this is that he was shown that we're actually living multiple lives in several different dimensions at once.
Alternative realities.
Yeah, we could be living in several different ones at the same time. And I've talked to God about this, saying, do you get bored easily? It's like, is there enough to keep him intrigued with everything going on, with all of the billions of planets and everything else? Apparently not. He needs more. It's just like, it's just so incredible. But my whole thing about the Torah is, I just wrote an article for a woman named Rivka in Israel, that she's including it in her book, and I had to talk about my Christian upbringing. That it was kind of like, I didn't find out that I was part Jewish until I was like 50 years old. That was kind of a surprise. My mother always thought I might be, but you know how moms are. They always are very complimentary of their kids and want to hope the best for you and all that. Well, I thought, okay, this is my mom talking, so I can't really take it too seriously. But sure enough, I found a living relative in Central California, and she sent me a picture of my actual parents. So I had to include this in my story. Found out that my father was Jewish, my mother was French. And some people would say, well, that means I'm really not Jewish then, because I have to have a Jewish mother. So I'm still kind of like an oddity, I guess. Heinz 57. But anyway, it does seem that nowadays I had just been aborted. But in those days, they didn't do that kind of thing. It was illegal. Again, our whole world has fallen into such state of degradation that life isn't considered important, and they shield people who do evil and they harm people who do good things. Everything's like completely upside down, backwards right now.
Have they found anything in the Torah about a removal of people or a vanishing of any kind, or anything that would kind of maybe allude to the rapture of the church? Because in the Old Testament, of course, in Isaiah, there's many comments that definitely allude to removal or a vanishing or whatever you want to call it.
Well, the answer to that is yes, and it was discovered by Professor Rips. In fact, he sent me the table, and it basically was about the entire sentence that's encoded in the Torah that says resurrection of the dead.
Oh, really?
And, of course, but that's also talked about in the Tanakh. Where is that? In Daniel, isn't it? Resurrection of the dead?
Yes.
Or no.
Or Daniel 12
it's
talks
the dry
about
bones thing. Yeah, I mean, there's places in the Old Testament that talks about that. It also talks about God's Spirit being poured out upon all flesh in those days. What does that mean? I think we have a very, very short-sighted view of the potential of that. We read this stuff and we just kind of blow past it. Oh, God's going to do something, He's going to pour out His Spirit. Okay, that's great. What's for lunch? That's kind of the way we...
Yes.
It's like you hear that in church and you're falling asleep while the pastor's, reading the same stuff without any emphasis on it at all, because everybody's read it a million times. But in this case, it's so incredible. All flesh means everybody, not just Christians or Jews, but it means the Chinese and people in Thailand and people in India and Russians and everything else. I mean, it's like it's huge. And how is He going to do that? I don't know. Will it be telepathic? How will people know? There's got to be something that happens that's going to be really interesting.
Well, there are more and more people now that are having visions and dreams. And Larry, what do you think about that? You've been kind of quiet. Hello?
Is he still on?
Larry, you still here? Oh, he dropped off. Wait just a minute. Let's see if I can get him back. Larry, are you there?
Can you hear me, Stuart?
I can now.
Now we can hear him.
Okay, yeah. Blog Talk Radio throwed me out about a half hour ago, and I couldn't get back in, and nobody knew I was gone. I guess I was quiet.
Well, were you able to listen at all?
Yeah, I could listen, and I was in the queue, but you didn't know I'd been gone, so you couldn't turn me back on. I wanted to ask Richard, though, if he'd share with us that deathbed information from Ron Wyatt.
Oh, yeah, sure. Because it's really kind of Torah-related, isn't it? And I didn't get to finish what I was saying about the Ten Commandments, which I believe they were built in 3D in the shape of a cube, and that Moses brought it down that way so he could lift it up and people could see the letters floating in midair.
Really?
That's what it says in the Midrash, that it was written on sapphire plates. So it had to be something that was sort of fragile because he threw it on the ground and it shattered. And then he had to have it replaced. But the original one that was broken was valuable. And so they built another ark to hold it. Did you know that?
No.
No, that is really interesting.
There's two arks.
Go into that.
There's the big ark that went into the portable tabernacle, the one that had all of the powers, and you see it in Raiders of the Lost Ark and all that. That's the main Ark of the Covenant. And then there was another one that they called the wooden ark, which I would imagine looks similar to the regular golden ark, but it wasn't golden, it was wood. And the wooden ark it's basically its job was to hold the pieces of the broken Ten Commandments.
Huh.
And according to the Midrash, which is a Jewish mystical text, according to the Midrash, one of the fragments of the plates that were broken was given to Moses, and that was his income. He could break little pieces of it off and use it to pay for stuff.
Wow.
Because it was made out of sapphire. It was like a gemstone. Isn't that fascinating?
That is.
Yeah. And it makes me wonder. So, it makes me wonder, Richard, if by chance the original Ten Commandments, if there was some spiritual significance between the original ones and a loss of maybe what that meant to Israel, and the second set that were replicated.
I don't know. I don't know. The first one is highly publicized. It was written by the finger of God.
Yes.
And of course there was a lot of construction when you really get into this stuff and start looking at it as more than just mere lore. But there's certain things that they couldn't use tools that were metallic to carve on the gemstones in the ephod. They had to use a device called the worm shamir, which we think had some kind of a radioactive isotope embedded in it, and it could actually tint the gemstones so that there was no engraving being done to them. And then it's the same with the Urim and Thummim, the perfect lights that were lighting up these stones from the backside, which apparently was some kind of segmented light panel. I don't know if it's LEDs or something like you would find in an iPhone, and of course you're not going to use a chisel and hammer on that because you'd destroy it.
Right.
So some of this stuff was high tech, and so that's why I'm saying if there were angelic beings involved, that we would look at it and say, oh, these are aliens. They have access to high technology. And in those days, there was all kinds of weird stuff going on, as we read about, that was going on in Egypt, mystical, weird stuff. And not all of it was good. Some of it was, it was Nephilim high-tech stuff. And I even discussed some of that with Professor Herelick in the behind-the-scenes pieces on the Torah Codes when that's finally out next week. I was saying, we were going through Peru, L.A. Marzulli and I, and we would see these stones, and they were andesite stones that had veins of quartz running through them. So according to Brian, our guide Brian, he said they were highly piezoelectric. Now, I know this is really kind of, it's like, oh, wow, you guys are such geeky individuals. But, I mean, basically, piezoelectric is something that's very commonplace in the use of our electronics today. It's basically it's a device that can be activated with electricity, or if you apply pressure to it, it generates electricity. It's like a two-way kind of deal. So, like, there's piezoelectric buzzers that you'll find on, like, backup emergency, indicators on trucks and stuff. They're piezoelectric, or they're microphones that are made with piezoelectric components, and they're cheap and effective. They don't sound all that great because they're not super high fidelity or anything, but they can generate a signal that way. But here we're talking about buildings made of this stuff. And I'm thinking, okay, so you'd see these walls and the rocks that are making them up fit perfectly. They're mortarless construction, and there's these holes in the wall that are trapezoidal with and they don't go all the way through. They end, which I thought was very curious. Why would you make a hole in this super hard rock that doesn't go anywhere? And so I stuck my head in one and started humming at different frequencies, and it got really loud once when I found this one thing. So everybody copied me, stuck their heads in, and I filmed them all doing it, but I started the process. So I asked Professor Herlick about it. I said, they seem to be really sensitive at one particular frequency, and he said, and he says this in the behind-the-scenes thing. It's really interesting. We get it. We wax into kind of space technology here, into stuff. And he said it's a waveguide, and he said it's basically working on resonance frequencies. Like you play middle C on the piano, and 3 octaves above that, you've got a harmonic that's coming out, right?
Yes. Yep.
Well, they were using sound somehow in those days, and the harmonic content could go way up into, RF frequencies, or we don't even know what all they were doing with it. So there was this thought that if they were able to excite those stones in a certain way, at a certain frequency, that something kind of amazing might happen. Maybe there was communication that could be made with people like in other countries, because the Earth wasn't tilted at a 23-degree axis like it is now.
Yeah.
And there were ley lines under all of those stones, and I'm sure that the ones that built all of this understood all of that technology, whereas the normal people and farmers had no idea what this was all for. But the Temple of the Sun, where they have 40, 50, 60-ton rocks, and they got these holes in them, and, they could have been levitating stones, or they could have been communicating, it could have been all sorts of stuff going on. And it looks very low-tech to us, but they knew how to use normal resonant frequencies. And the only guy that's ever come close to this in our age was Tesla.
Yes.
He understood all about resonant frequencies. Well, the question that Larry just asked about Ron Wyatt and his deathbed confession, I've been very fascinated with the whole Ark of the Covenant thing, because there's some people that say the Ark could have been radioactive.
Yes.
And to me, that makes a lot of sense. It's like, well, why would it do all these crazy things, and how does it just get these properties? And I've talked with Dr. Brooks Agnew about it. I've talked with Professor Herlick about it. And, when it was stolen by, I guess it was the Philistines that took it, at that one point they stole it from Israel, and they brought it into their city, and everybody was cheering, and everybody ended up with tumors. Remember that?
Yes, absolutely.
It's a very, very weird story, very strange, weird story in the Bible. And so they realized that it was killing them. So they sent it back to Israel. They put the ark on an ox cart, and they made like a peace offering to send back to Israel. And what they did, they made golden tumors. I mean, this is such a weird story, guys. It's almost unbelievable. They made all these tumors out of gold, and they put them around the ark. And I think they also made golden rats or something like that, put them around the thing, and then they strapped a couple oxen to it and, gave them a lash of a whip and sent them off, and the oxen knew where to go, and they basically took the ark back to Israel through Beth Shemesh. And when Israel saw it coming, everybody rejoiced. So then you have to think, well, so the ark was emanating with some kind of radioactivity, some kind of uranium isotope. And so that's kind of interesting, don't you think? I mean, that maybe that there's something going on there that would help explain some of these things it could do. Other also than, some people think it's a giant capacitor that stores static electric charges. Tesla thought that, I believe. All of these things make sense, but then as far as the radioactivity thing, when you really analyze how the Holy of Holies was constructed, the place where the ark was sitting was coated in gold. Remember that?
Yep. Yeah, sure do.
The tabernacle was made out of, it had wood panels that had rods that could be pushed through them and hold them together. So it could disassemble it and cart it to the next location pretty easily. But the ark itself was inside of this area that was basically gold-plated. And I always thought when I was a kid, wow, they really didn't care how much money they spent doing this. It's like, but then as I get older, I'm going, oh, there's a reason for the gold plating. It's not just so they could flaunt how much gold they had, because the ark had to be put into a safe location so that it didn't irradiate into the rest of the camp. It had to be shielded, almost like a Faraday cage.
Yeah,
so,
actually.
There's this guy in Israel who says he's looking for the ark. His name is Harry Moskoff, and he's really, I don't know, I'm kind of perturbed with the fact that he's making a big media event out of it, which I think is very foolish, because he could get people killed doing that, because the Arabs get all upset about the fact that that's going on and just go out and arbitrarily start randomly killing Jews. So this seems like he's incredibly naive, or trying to raise money, or I don't know. He's connected with prophecy in the news, which probably has no concept of that they're playing with fire here. I really would doubt it very much. But what is interesting is that back in the 90s, there was Ron Wyatt was looking for the ark, and he was looking under the area of Zedekiah's Cave, which is basically a section near Solomon's Quarry. If you've ever been to Israel and gotten off at the Damascus Gate and walked into Solomon's Quarry, it's this enormous underground cave area that was where they quarried the stones that built the first temple. And it's all like limestone, and I've got a rock sitting here on the floor next to me from Solomon's Quarry, so I can not forget what it looked like. But they weren't also allowed to use metallic tools to quarry the stones. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And I think that what happened, I think what they did, what it looks like, is they had enormous grinding wheels that basically chewed this stuff out, and they had thousands of people working down there. So there's many levels of caves in that area, and Ron Wyatt was there, and he was working with an archaeologist by the name of Yehiel Zellinger, who I've spoken to. Zellinger is a great guy, very knowledgeable. And Ron Wyatt found himself, according to his story, his deathbed confession, last thing he said before he passed away, was that he found this chamber, and he went through an opening, and I think he said there were already 3 guys in there when he got in, and there was like this rainbow design on the wall, and sitting in front of it was the Ark of the Covenant. And he said that as soon as he got close to these men, or whoever they were, he got really dizzy and went almost unconscious. Now, what does that tell you it was?
Oh, yeah.
Well, you know
How
what?
could those guys have gotten in there?
That sounds very much Larry. Remember?
Yeah.
About the giants. They couldn't get close to them because they'd get dizzy or be killed if they went any further.
Yeah, that happened to
Well,
Moses.
yeah, any time that we're next to an angelic presence, that seems to be, remember Daniel, he fell down on his face and he was lifted back up. You know, fear not. Well, the good angels would say, fear not.
Mhm.
And just look, in my article that I wrote, we just have to get over the fact that people just read this stuff and think this is just a story, it's just a Bible tale. No, they're relating actual events that happened. And also when we hear about alien abductions and all of this, the same thing happens to people, the exact same thing. I've talked with Dr. Jacobs in Philadelphia at his home when L.A. and I were there and for shooting Watcher 7. By the way, Watcher 7 has exceeded all the views in the topic of UFOs on Amazon.
Really?
Well, great.
There was another film up there called I Know What I Saw, which is a really well done film. And Watcher 7, I just found out from our distributor, had 3 times the number of views.
Wow.
Which I thought was just astonishing. So Dr. Jacobs had said that, I asked him this question, I said, have you ever had people say, is there like a sphere of influence that these beings have as they get closer? Does this telepathy get stronger? Or do you know how far away you have to be? I mean, is there any kind of like decay of this potency that happened? He goes, you're the only person that's ever asked me that. And he really loved the question. And he said, yes, there appears to be a sphere of influence when you're next to these beings. Yeah. And we have to just get over the fact that this sounds really creepy or anything like that. This is how they are. I mean, if we're approached by an angel, then we can go with that knowledge that this is how it works. We're not to be afraid of it. This is going to happen to you. You're probably going to lose consciousness for a second until your brain gets used to the idea that this is going on right next to you. And just realize that they're built this way. They have this ability. This is how they communicate. They don't speak verbally. They communicate to your mind directly. And I believe someday that's what we will be able to do. We can't yet.
That's right. Stuart, are we about out of time? We wanted him to give his...
No, we got another half hour. Well, I put it up for 2 hours because I thought we'd probably run that whole thing.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Okay, thank you.
No, I'm sorry just tell me to shut up at any time.
No, keep going. This is exciting stuff.
I just think that we're getting to the point where either we're going to visibly see aliens visiting the Earth, and we have to evaluate. I don't agree with the feeling that all aliens are evil. I just don't agree with that. I think that there have been a lot of people who have dealt and experienced with aliens that are incredibly evil. And I've talked to these people. So, I mean, it's not like I'm just making up my opinion here. Like Travis Walton, the guy that did the movie, what's it called? Fire from the Sky, I think.
Yes.
A film that's about his abduction. I know Travis. I've talked to him on numerous occasions, and he just said that these beings are despicably evil. the things that they were doing to other humans was just unbelievable. And then there's people that I know that have had experiences that are good. I've had, I know, Larry, you've had experiences, personal experiences. And when I was in Sonoma at the film festival there, screening Watcher 7 back in April for Jim Ledwith, who's a really wonderful guy, people wouldn't go home after the movie. They wanted to talk for hours. And, you know, it was like, of course, Stephen Bassett was there, and he talks a lot, and they asked us question after question and question. And then people came and basically wanted to tell me their own experiences. They were so excited someone could finally listen to them and believe them. And I had this woman say, I had this experience with an insectoid. And she described like this being that I had shown in the video in Watchers 9, where it was on that craft that Roger Lear had given me the footage for. Remember that? Where you could actually see this creature that looked like a praying mantis sort of head with the big eyes and all that. She was approached by one of those, and it was not evil.
Well, you know, Richard, you remember I shared with you that I'd had an experience. I was taken up to a location and met one of these praying mantis type creatures, and it was not unpleasant. And as a matter of fact, during that experience, I was healed of an ailment that, and this was not planned, I assure you. But then I was back home and I was healed.
I know that experience. I just didn't know if you were ready to divulge it or not. So I was being sensitive of that, but I believe you because you're
with my reputation or non-reputation, it really doesn't matter at this point anymore.
Well, I just thought you would find it interesting that I talked to a woman in Northern California that had a similar experience of yours, and neither one of you know each other or live anywhere near each other, and you both had that experience.
Absolutely.
And I didn't ask for her. I didn't ask people if anyone had an experience with an insectoid. I never asked such a question. They were coming up and offering this information.
Yeah, that's what I think I opened up to you a little bit after. Remember that I think you call it Kratzenberg experience in Turkey, where you actually got that film, I believe, from Roger Lear, and you found the creature in it.
That's right, and it was like moving like 10 or 12 times faster than normal, and we realized it was because it was in its own time-space continuum, and we were shooting it with a camera on the shore there. It's in Kumburgos, Turkey, which is just around the corner from Istanbul on the Sea of Marmara. And they frequently see UFOs there. I had a friend send me a picture of a UFO seen over the Sea of Marmara just last year. It's happening still. I don't know. There's certain areas, when there's constantly UFOs being sighted over Mexico, all over the state of Mexico, and then you have to wonder, okay, if some of these UFOs are alien, then, and if they're not the good kind, if they're the bad kind, then we have to know what was there in antiquity, and what was going on, who were they worshiping in that area, and why do they still remember those locations? I don't think that time is of any consequence to some of these beings, because they can pop in and out of whatever time they want, and they just are comfortable with certain areas that are hot spots on the earth where they've been before, and that's like home for them. You know what I'm saying? I know how crazy this sounds, but I really think that's what's going on here. I really do. And I think they're about to make themselves known again. But I think alien creatures, alien beings are like people. There's good ones and bad ones. There seem to be a lot. The ones that we see so often could be bad because they're so bold and gutsy, and they really don't care about how they're treating us. And they're trying to trick us. And
yes.
that's what Jacques Vallée also thought.
Yeah.
He was a pretty renowned studier of all this stuff, but I don't think all of them are bad. I refuse to believe that all of them are evil. That's not the way the universe is designed. But then, we're about to see, when I first started really considering the whole Antichrist character, well, obviously this person doesn't seem human, or he seems like some kind of hybrid, don't you think? I mean, it's like he calls fire down from heaven. He, creates tremendous lying signs and wonders and all of this. So it seems to me he's like some kind of hybrid creature that, and to me, the ultimate hybrid was Yeshua, part man, part God DNA.
Yes.
And anything Luciferian is always copying that formula.
That's right.
Yes.
So the Antichrist would be a copy on the dark side of Jesus, I think. I mean, to me, that's like what it's all about. He can't do anything creative on his own, so he copies what God's done and flips it. It's just like what we were talking about earlier about the death squad in Ezekiel.
Uh-huh.
And remember the guys that were weeping and sighing over the injustices in Jerusalem got a mark on their forehead, and they were the ones that were spared. Remember that? So now in Scripture it talks about the mark of the beast, and where do they get? They get a mark on their hand or on their forehead. It's just a copy of what happened before.
Well, speaking of that, Richard, speaking of that mark, didn't the experience Ron Wyatt had? Wasn't he told by the angels when that ark would be revealed?
Yeah, what was interesting was that they said that they were going to hide the opening so no one could find it until the time of the mark of the beast. That's what they told them. Now, I wasn't sure I believed Ron Wyatt's story until he said that. Because then I thought, this is the first thing that resonates with me as possibly truth. Because if you guys remember when we did, when Roger was still alive and we did this alien implant removal in the hospital, basically there, we had it on ultrasound. We had it on, we used a simple Home Depot stud finder to look for metallic objects. That didn't work. We tried a Gauss meter. That didn't work. We tried everything. We could not find the implant. And we had all the correct test equipment, and we'd found it a week earlier instantly. There it is, right there. Put an X on Bill's skin.
Uh-huh.
It was like no big deal. I mean, we found it instantly. So then the day that we were going in to surgically remove it, it disappeared.
Huh.
It was shrouded from all of our test equipment. None of it worked. You put the stupid little Home Depot stud finder, which is, as dorky as this sounds, guys, it really makes a lot of sense. You want to find a metallic object, you get a stud finder, right? So you stick that on the skin, and right off the bat, okay, it's right there. I mean, it's easy. It's a simple device. And then the Gauss meter was registering 6.5 to 7 milligauss where this object was, 6 millimeter long implant just under the skin next to his knee, just below the skin, about the thickness of a pencil lead, and it was radiating that much of a field, magnetic field, which was really kind of incredible when you think about it. It's not being powered, but then it's being powered by his nervous system. Obviously, the nerve endings were connected to it, which we found out later under electron microscope. We could see all of that. But on the day that we went to remove it, nothing worked. Nothing. And everything was a different piece of equipment with fresh batteries. None of it worked. You put the stud finder on, and it went off everywhere. It beeped every place we put it. It was just unbelievable. The Gauss meter read 0. The needle didn't even move. And
wow.
And And the ultrasound device, which is a multi-$1,000 device, goes in there and uses sound waves to look for objects near the skin, registered nothing. So then LA prays, Father, we need this thing to show up because we're all here, we're all set to do it, and we need this thing to get out, and we ask that whoever's cloaking this device from us will stop doing it and doing it soon. In Jesus' name, amen. It was something very simple like that. And we're in a room full of people who, some Jewish folks there and some people who are completely agnostic. And it's like, okay, you got a bunch of really wacky Christians in here trying to look for alien implants. I mean, it could be, how much weirder could it appear, okay? So I'm there with my camera, and I'm shooting the screen of the ultrasound, and basically I've got like a big lens on it so I can blow it up really big and put it on a big HD monitor that I set up for Roger because his eyes were kind of failing. And all of a sudden, this thing just dissolved into the screen, dissolved in, like an effect. And I looked at it and I said, what the heck is that? I mean, I didn't know what it was. I thought, is it like a growth in Bill's leg that we hadn't seen before, or is it? And then Roger said, no, I think that's it. And sure enough, he was right. The thing is, on an ultrasound, if there's an object, it's sending out sound waves, so it creates a shadow under it, kind of like a black shadow falls under the object. And then Dr. Matriciano, who was doing the surgery, he would move the wand off and put it back on, and every time he did it, he could find it instantly. No sweat. Now, he'd done this for an hour and never found anything. Oh. One prayer, all of a sudden there it is. So I'm saying that, if we ever do get to be put in a situation where we're looking for the ark ourselves, going to pray before we go in.
Yeah.
Ask for the opening to be revealed, and then hope I don't die of some kind of radioactive poisoning. And if there's something like that going on, then the IDF needs to be suited up like a hazmat operation. They really do. I mean, and if they bring the ark out, it needs to be treated with kid gloves. I mean, it's like you're dealing with a very dangerous device here. Still.
Well, you'd need Dan Gordon around on a deal like that.
Oh yeah, Dan Gordon would, I'm sure, assist in something like that. And also Danny Grossman, who is a tremendous. He's a former A4 pilot, fighter pilot for Israel. Knows Bibi Netanyahu personally and everything else. So Danny is a tremendous ally for things like that. But I don't want to give away trade secrets, but there's things that I think that can be. I think they could be done. I'm beginning to think that this is the time for God to reveal the Articles of the Tabernacle, because Israel is surrounded by enemies. It's almost like Psalm 83. I mean, all these scriptures that people scoff at are actually happening. And, yet people don't recognize the reality of them. And all this stuff is actually going on. And we have the Torah Codes, too, now. We didn't have that before. So, anyway, we're dealing with some very crazy pseudo-scientific, pseudo-spiritual things. And what we were saying earlier about, you're asking about ascension and all that, the people that are talking about ascension more than anybody are the New Agers. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that they're coming out at the same time that we're coming up on that star sign in what appears to be the pivot.
Yeah, they're talking about we're entering the fifth dimension. There's going to be an ascension. I mean, they just totally. Have you listened to any New Age philosophy? This is commonplace now. So I'm going, okay, if God is pouring out His Spirit upon all flesh, not everybody's going to understand all of the biblical truths. They haven't studied it all, but that doesn't mean that God's not going to reveal something of truth to them consciously somehow. Yeah. That's why I don't want to criticize our New Age friends too heavily, even though I think they're in error in a lot of things that they believe. Still, they really believe that this ascension thing is real. They really believe that, more so than a lot of Christians I know. So it's like, there's crazy stuff going on right now.
Well, it's like the Cliff High and the bots. He came out with this ascension and people vanishing. And now he's an atheist, basically, as far as I can determine. He has no use for Christians or anybody else that believes in any religion. I think he's pretty much an agnostic. But it was just very interesting that language was showing up and showing up now.
I think it's very interesting. It's very interesting. And plus, when you read people's near-death experiences, this is the only litmus test that we really have as far as the afterlife, is people that have died and come back to life again. And now there are ISIS fighters that have come back from a near-death experience and had to experience what it was like their own beheading after they took someone else's head off. They experienced it themselves. They came back petrified, and their lives completely turned around after that experience. And then other people who were drug addicts and died in the back of a taxi cab and had an experience where they said, I was basically seeing life as if it's all HTML code. And we're just like, what we see here is like the result of the web page, but there's all this code running behind it that makes all of our lives work. And then you have like other people, scientists, and people who are saying it's a 1 in a billion chance that we're not living in a digital simulation now. 1 in a billion chance that we're not living in a digital simulation. And people that have died and have made it to heaven, not all of them are Christians. Some were atheists, didn't believe any of this stuff. And they get there and they're confronted with Yeshua, and all of a sudden they realize, okay, this is real. Now,
yeah, right. Yeah.
And they ask for forgiveness, and that's it. They're forgiven. And, I mean, this is just like the thief on the cross. Lord, remember me when you go into your kingdom. Well, today you'll be with me in paradise. End of story. No sinner's prayer, no nothing. Well, I'll just see you in a few minutes. I mean, that's really darn cool.
It's different.
It's different. I think what we do, we limit Yeshua's potency by attaching all these things that you have to do to be saved. I think it's ridiculous because people that have never heard, what are they going to do? Instantly go to hell? I don't think that's the case. I think that God's mercy is so incredible. He knows people's hearts, and we don't. I think there's going to be a lot of so-called Christians who aren't going to be there. They're the ones that say, well, Lord, Lord, we did all this in your name, and we cast out demons, and we yada, yada, yada. And Jesus is going to say, depart from me, you workers of iniquity, I never knew you. That's super scary.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the most scary verses of Scripture. It's kind of like Thessalonians and the arrival and the delusion that's coming.
Yeah. I think it's the most scary thing I've ever read. To have Christ tell you he never knew you and depart from me, that's it. It's over.
Yeah. Well, it not only is scary, I think it shows, what the Lord really is looking for are people who will search him out. And, he says, I'm not far from you. If you search for me with all of your heart, all of your mind, all of your strength, you'll find me. But people don't pay any attention to that, basically.
Well, they don't.
So it's very, very interesting.
We're into the dogma instead of the reality of it. And also kind of the interesting, weirdly scientific side of the Bible and all the stuff, the technology involved and all of those things. There was really amazing stuff going on. And the older I get, the more this becomes apparent to me that we were seeing stuff that the prophets had no idea how to even describe because it's high tech. Now if we looked at it, we'd know what it is. Oh, that's a blah, 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 or that's a that's a UFO, or they're using anti-gravitational devices, or it's like, well, I can't wait. It's going to be really
well.
Something going to have.
Yeah, something too is in the Bible where at some places it describes arrows. It appears to be describing missiles.
Yes, flaming arrows.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I believe that. Well,
when you were dealing with the rabbis, go ahead.
Which is it's a book of Nahum somewhere. I think it talks about the chariots shall jostle in the broad ways. They shall seem like torches and run like the lightning. I mean, it seems like he's seeing a vision of traffic and cars at night with the headlights on.
Yes.
It seems like that.
Well, that's the only way they could describe things,
Well, sure. It's like they wouldn't know how to describe a glowing LED or, a video monitor, except in Revelation it talks about the image of the beast, and everybody would be worshiping the image of the beast. Well, all we do is look at moving images now. I mean, while I'm talking to you on my phone here, I have 3 computer monitors all lit up displaying different things for reference, and we're just so used to that. We're like, that's part of our life. And we would be watching something going on, in the Middle East in a little QuickTime movie window or something on the internet. I mean, and everything has gotten so fast now. We're dealing with not every area has this, but out here in LA, we've got Spectrum, it's called. It used to be Time Warner cable, but now it's like, on a good day, my download speed is 115 megabits a second.
Wow.
They still haven't gotten the upload much past 12, but the download speed is incredible. So you can watch high-resolution movies on Netflix, and they look like Blu-ray. There's rarely any stammering or stalling of a film watching it back. And only 3 or 4 years ago, that wouldn't have been possible. It'd been, in your dreams you could do that. Well, now we're doing it.
Yeah.
And, and there may be even the idea that, like broadcast television would be, they're already broadcasting digital, right? But there may be even little apps and packets of information being sent through broadcast. So you could have a device that would be receiving broadcast signals, but also computer data at the same time, and click here and you'll see this. It's like what we do on a website now, but it might even be a little different, where it's wireless beyond Wi-Fi. It's like more powerful than Wi-Fi, and you could pick it up. I think that's where it's going, and the FCC is basically taking over most of the UHF bands above, I don't know where the cutoff is. It might be like channel 24 and above, something like that, because that's the best places to have digital information being disseminated. So all those stations that are, UHF stations are going to get bought out or go out of business. And the lower bands below that they're having problems with like LED devices interfering with their signal, because you got LED traffic lights and cars with LEDs. It's not, they're periodic pulse light sources, so there's all that creates radio interference. So we're just living a different time right now. It's
Lord
time.
Terry's. Yeah, if the Lord Terry's, who knows how farly advanced we get. But I think there's a cutoff limit.
I know.
The Lord's going to lower the boom.
Yeah, I think so too. And thank you for all the information that you guys sent me this week. I've got to go through it all, and every year it seems like September 23rd has some significance, and then this year's, I guess, it's a comet coming through.
Yes.
There's a
lot. There's a lot to that date. We got about 4 minutes left, but have the good rabbis done a lot of work on the UFO enigma, and have they come up with anything as an answer?
Well, all of the real rabbis believe that this is prophetic, that all these things have to happen before the time of the Mashiach.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, Stephen Greer, who's well known in the UFO community, believes that at least half, if not 60% of the UFOs we see are man-made.
Mm-hmm.
Believes that they're
back-engineered
UFOs. Yeah. That makes some sense to me, actually. I believe that it's a combination of stuff. This is why it's so incredibly confusing right now to know what we're looking at, who's doing what. It's all like secretive to the point where the idea of truth is completely thrown out the window. And, of course, we know that to be the case because that's what it says it will happen in the book of Daniel. That truth will be thrown to the ground, I believe it says. And, boy, that is the way it is now.
So I guess we just have to kind of watch and, as the Lord said, be careful in your watching so that you know what you're looking at, know the signs, know what's coming. But this may be coming much faster than people realize, I think.
Yeah, I think it's possible. We may all want to be living in Israel within the next couple of years. It might be the safest place on earth to be.
Yeah. Well, Israel will enter into her tribulation period, or the time of Jacob's trouble, and they will accept their false Messiah. So, it's going to be a most interesting time of times, I guess one could say. Larry, what else you got?
Yeah.
We got about 2 minutes.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Richard if he had heard any data on any of the 5778 Torah Code results.
Oh, yeah, I know Glazerson has been working on it. He is always looking for tables on Messiah, and there is this theory. Well, there's a bunch of things about next year that seem to resonate. One is the Messiah could come next year or even this year because it comes up in the codes in both years. Mm-hmm. It also came up in 5776, but then he said there's some rabbis who believe that there was a missing year after Adam was created. And we could still be in the year 5776 and not know it.
Fascinating.
Because of the flood, everything got goofed up too.
Yeah.
But then you were asking
how do people get a hold of you, Richard?
Well, you can go to endtodarkness.com, or you can go to pinlight.com, PINLIGHT. And if you want to watch this Torah Code film, if you have Amazon Prime, go to the channel that's all one word, UFO TV. Just type in this Amazon search box, UFO TV, and you'll get the whole list, and you'll see Watcher 6 and Watcher 7, and eventually you're going to see the Torah Code piece up. UFO TV got really interested in the project and really wanted it badly, and so I let them have it. I said, okay, great, because they're promoting it, so... there's a lot of interesting stuff there, including a movie about Tesla that has Orson Welles in it, and you should watch that. It's an old movie, but it's really kind of cool, and you can watch it for free on Amazon Prime.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for coming on, and thanks a lot, Larry. I don't know if we're even broadcasting at this point. Yeah, okay, good night, everybody.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
Yep.